Coming up, it is the two-part masterpiece that will be the Brooklyn Nets regular season preview. We kick it off at the high level, record predictions, playoff seeding, and surprise narratives around the NBA deadline. We dive in coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie. Over here, Adam Armbrecht. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off on your first purchase. And Doug, before we get into all of our big, beautiful predictions for the upcoming season, the overall sentiment around this team is a turning of the page and I think generally positive vibes, right, with everything that went on over the last couple of years.
I mean, just think about where we were last year at this time, which feels like an absolute lifetime ago. KD, and they're entering the season. It feels like it's going to be okay. We're coming off a summer of Kevin Durant asking for a trade, rescinding it at the last second. With Kyrie, you kind of never know what's going to happen there. Unsure about what Ben Simmons is even going to look like. And like the whole and a championship timeline where like the expectations are ramped all the way up to 100, and really anything short of a championship at this point, especially with the superstars, is going to look like a massive failure. And so expectations are still, I think, generally positive, but the vibe was totally different. And then, by the way, it didn't take long for the vibe to totally change and Nash is fired and all this other stuff, right? So I just think going into this year, we talk about this a ton, but expectations define a lot of what success looks like. And the expectations for the Nets this season are just totally different. And they're gearing up to just be a really fun team that we can root for with, I think, reasonable expectations of what their end of the season outcomes for, and what we can feel like is, positive, or what we can feel like is disappointing. And it just looks so much different than how it looked last year that it's like a breath of fresh air, even with question marks going into the season.
Oh, of course. And, and positive going into this season is because there are things that can be achieved. It was impossible to have that in the past seasons because positive achievement was, going to the finals, winning a championship, maybe, right? Everything less than that was always a drag. It was always negative. So that's completely been washed away here. We're going to talk about, by the way, tomorrow in part 2 of this, drill down on Ben Simmons stat lines, on Mikal Bridges, talk about over-unders for different categories for this roster and individuals as well. But let's start off with the most important and the most positive possible outcome for the Brooklyn Nets this season, making the playoffs. Doug, I will start it off. I believe, yes, this team does. We're going to get into seeding coming up here in a minute, but do you believe this team makes the playoffs and will extend it all the way to that play-in tournament, obviously, as well?
Well, why don't you go first? You said they make the playoffs. Like, well, let's start there, because I think that might be a shade more positive. So you're locked in. This is a playoff team, top 8 seed, and sort of like away you go with no problem there. And is that where you land? I think I'm a tick lower, but let's just start with you, because I think that's trending a little more positive, and I like to hear that.
I believe that, 37.5 right now in the win total over under for the Brooklyn Nets. You can make the case that this is too far to expand yourself, but I'm going to put them, if I believe this team can have a good season, if I believe in Ben Simmons, I'm going to say that this is a team that can go 43-39. And that starts to set an expectation that you are one of the more stronger defensive units, right? That you are frustrating in underdog matchups throughout the year, and that ultimately your offense is capable of doing enough with Ben Simmons orchestrating it to really be a team that surprises a lot of these other rosters that have expectations going into this year.
Yeah, so, okay, that's interesting. So right now, if you look over at FanDuel, I'll get to my prediction here in a second, but if you look over at FanDuel, Nets are 11th in terms of playoff seeding. It goes Celtics, Bucks, Cavs, Sixers, Heat, Knicks, Hawks, Bulls, Pacers, Magic, Nets. It's pretty close around the Pacers, Magic, and Nets, and they and the Net Magic might even be tied. But that does put them at the 11th seed out of the playoffs in terms of just overall playoff odds. You seed them higher as above 500 team. I'm going to go a tick higher as well and say that they are right around the 500 team, and maybe I'll say 40-42. That puts them over the win total at 30 over 37.5. We'll get to some of the reasons why I think we think this. I think those are actually going to be pretty in line with each other. And I think that it's close for me because I think the Pacers, Magic, and Nets do sit around, and I'll even put the Bulls below them because I think the Bulls could go the different direction here. But I put the Nets around where the Pacers and Magic are in terms of talent and other things. I just think it could come down to some other things. It might not even be like totally just talent related. So I'm right. I'm pretty close with you. I think that 40 wins is being a little bullish here,
Sure.
but I think in the end, I feel pretty good for some of the reasons I will outline here around like where the team is sort of headed.
Yeah, and we know, obviously, we talked about in our last episode, Cameron Johnson and coming back and being ready to play and healthy. He'll have a minutes restriction to start the year, but I think it's impossible for me to talk about this offseason and go, well, we believe Mikal Bridges, he is a known commodity now, and he's going to be an X factor for this team. We believe Cameron Johnson is actually being overlooked in terms of his all-around game and the impact he can have on this roster. We believe that even a non-shooting Ben Simmons, his ability, his court vision, his defense, I cannot sit here and also talk about like Spencer Dinwiddie's game gets better because Ben Simmons is there and all these guys, right? I cannot sit here and list positive after positive around the roster and then get to this point and go, yeah, I doubt it. And I legitimately, like, I just think that this team is going to be surprising in that vein. And maybe actually for a reason that you and I discussed over the offseason as being something we wish the team had done. You didn't get rid of any of the veteran pieces. So that's a commitment to wanting to have a reasonable expectation of a floor, of wanting to have experienced guys, even into the Royce O'Neals and the Dorian Finney-Smiths of the world, the Spencer Dinwiddies. Hey, you kept these guys around because you believe those two new players in Mikal and Cameron, along with the return of Ben Simmons, means this team can be more competitive. And arguably, they are one of the few rosters when we talk about the back of the Eastern Conference that has real variables to it, right? That has something when you look at a paper, you don't know truly what that ceiling is. So that's why it's bullish. We get it. It's bullish. I can't even imagine what the odds would be for me to say 6 wins over on projections for FanDuel, but I'll take them at 43 and 39 and that they are in fact playoff bound.
Okay, yeah, and I think like I'm probably again just to reiterate, probably looking more. I want to talk a little bit more about why we think this too, and
Yes.
and like I said, tomorrow we'll talk a bunch about the we'll talk about a bunch of like individual performances because I think this is going to inform a lot of where we land. Go ahead.
No. Because the next thing we're going to discuss here, and you're right, the individual performances are going to matter a big way to influencing how we think this team goes. And I actually think we're on the same page in terms of a lot of the individual. Just when I add them up, I go a little bit higher than you do. In a moment, though, I have a clear-cut end of the season schedule explanation for why the Brooklyn Nets will get to 43 wins and why they will be a 6 seed. Let's get into that coming up here in a second.
All right, before we get to that, snap into the action this NFL and NBA season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. You're going to love to hear this. Right now, new customers over on FanDuel are going to get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. All you got to do is place a $5 real money bet, and you're getting the $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. Whatever happens to that $5, don't even worry about it. I mean, worry about it because you want to put something in that wins. But in the end, no matter what happens, you're getting the $200 in bonus bets back. Maybe you agree with where Adam and I are going on the over here with 37.5 wins for the Brooklyn Nets. We'll take it, baby. Plus 144 to make the playoffs as well. We'll take that as well. Get a little cheddar in on your love of the Nets early and often right now on FanDuel spreads, player props, over-unders, and much more. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on. Kick off and tip off this NBA season. Keep it in the action on the NFL season as well. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
Okay, as we continue our preview of the Brooklyn Nets season, both Doug and I are taking the over. And Doug, real quick, you would say that looking at the Nets over under of 37.5, are you fairly bullish that the Nets surpass that? Even if you think you're being a little more optimistic, do you think that 37.5 does feel low just on spec with the players that they have on this team?
No, I feel like actually real talent wise, that feels about right. I think 37.5, like I think they're by talent, they are around this team, right? With the understanding that like, Simmons could really kind of come fully back and some other things could break right for them in terms of the guys that they brought in. I think that where I'm comfortable, and we've said this all season around where we land with their win total, where I'm comfortable on this win total compared to say the Magic or compared to say the Pacers specifically is when push comes to shove at the end of the season, and maybe this has to do with your schedule too, that the Nets' motivations are just totally different from these other teams. The Nets do not have the draft picks. They have no incentive to tank. They can get late season. Losing gains them nothing. Yep. And so when you look at that, there aren't many other teams that can really say that there's no teams in this range of like talent that can say that. But when you look at that from a Nets point of view and who they have, they're just there's no world where they cannot put their best foot forward all the way down to the end, because it just doesn't help them. When Houston getting that pick, why bother? Like, why lose? We've seen teams when, let's say, like, I don't know, I'm making this scenario up, but the Pacers get halfway through the season, something happens to Tyrese, right? Halliburton. Okay, like, they're still young. They still have their picks. They can kind of have it go a different direction. There's a world where, like, they can, build in sort of a basement to their overall just feeling for the season. They're never going to do that. They're never going to do that the whole season. And so even with time to work stuff out, that's why I just feel comfortable with the over. I just think that I actually think it's underrated. I think it's actually not been talked about enough, is that, like, other people don't seem to understand actually that they're never going to not try. Unlike almost any other team when they get into these situations.
Including, by the way, something we talked about in the offseason, the in-season tournament. The Nets are going to play in every one of those games. They're going to be competitive in every one of those games, and it matters to your regular season record. But there's going to be teams that make excuses maybe and don't necessarily care or aren't committed to. The Nets might steal wins on that just because they're like, hey, it feels good? Go in an extra round in the in-season tournament. That means something to us relative to other teams. Now, here's what I like about it, Dougster. First, I'm going to tell you that when you go over and you look at the standings, and we know it's the Milwaukee's, the Bostons, the 76ers with an eye on what could be an absolute just disaster for them potentially, the Cavs, the Knicks. The Nets were the 6th seed last year, and then you have the Atlanta Hawks, the Miami Heat are big X factors, and we talked about teams like Chicago, Toronto that maybe will fall out of it. The Pacers are in the mix there. So I'm probably underrating almost certainly the Atlanta Hawks here. The Miami Heat are interesting to me because I think maybe they didn't get the big move. Are they still going to make a big move? And if they don't, I could see them at a minimum being a team, as we know historically, is far more concerned on the playoffs and that run than anything else. So the Brooklyn Nets are there. They're sitting in the 7th seed and they're feeling good about life. And right ahead of them is another team that feels like they can achieve in the Indiana Pacers. But then I go look at the schedule. Monday, April 1st, and Wednesday, April 3rd. 2 games against the Pacers late in the season. I submit to you, Doug, and you'll tell me what the over-under says for the Pacers on FanDuel, that the Brooklyn Nets will have 2 games late in the season that they can effectively steal away a higher seed from the Pacers as they go down that home stretch. Some other winnable games there as well, but they have the head-to-head where they can control their own destiny.
Yeah, and who knows where these teams are going to be? Things always crop up over the course of a season. Injuries happen. Things don't work out. Best laid plans and all. Every team you think about right now is the best version of themselves, and then it sometimes just doesn't take much. A la the very beginning of the show, where we were like Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, Ben Simmons, and Steve Nash. Let's see what happens. And 3/4 of those guys are, hit the dusty trail, and and now we're just in a totally different situation. So again, like, this is all just like best version stuff, of course, from the outset, but like, even like the Hawks, right? They made the DeJounte Murray trade. Like, they have their own pick this year. Right. Like, if it's not working out with Snyder and they want to do a reset with Trey and stuff, like, they could tank. Like, every other team is in this situation where if it starts to go bad, they could be in a fight for the bottom. And and just knowing that the Nets aren't in that situation, and like you said, late season stuff with the schedule where they could be, because it's hard to imagine the Nets are. This is a good point by you. It's hard to imagine, even in a sort of a worst case scenario, that they're so far out of it by this point. Right? Like, because I think we already know I think the Pistons and Wizards are just going to be not very good. And I think that's pretty set. We'll see about the Hornets. They can make a move. I have no faith in the Raptors. Like, that's, to me, 3 teams minimum that are just all the way there. You want to build in downside risk for a couple other ones. It's just hard to imagine the world where the Nets are just total dust with 5 games to go or whatever. Right. And at that point, that's just what they're going to be doing, because go for it. Right. And
even if they try to make the play, even if they were dust, they're still going to want to win the games anyway. Right. Like, it won't, like, it's still not going to
where want a good example? Last year, where they should have tanked,
They refuse to do it.
and they refused to do it, and and made the playoffs by the skin of their teeth to some degree.
Yeah.
Look at that. That's a pretty good proxy. Now, you could say the same proxy is they were an under 500 team for the trade deadline. But they didn't have Ben Simmons. So I don't know. There's just a lot of reasons to there's a lot of reasons to stay really invested with this team all season long. I guess that's the point.
Yeah, and I wonder too, the other part of this year, just when we talk about the seeding and being able to get that there, where did you think that they were going to finish? I said they can get to that 6 seed with some late game wins. You have them as an 8th seed. I think you said they're at the top. When we look at these other teams, the volatility around, say the Miami, I think Miami Heat, I'm being too bullish, no pun intended, looking at Chicago, that they're going to have more problems than not. But we didn't mention Toronto too here, right? Like, even if they say they get to that seed, and let's live in the world where they're in the play-in tournament first and then a first-round playoff. What do they accomplish? If they're in the play-in tournament, do you think that they can win their way out of it and secure an official top 8 seed going into whatever, quote unquote, the real playoff picture?
Yeah, I think by the way, I think I have them like 9 or 10 right now. Okay. I think that's right around where I put them in, which is it right around the play-in. I think there'll be a team, if they get to this point, it probably also means that they have figured some stuff out, right? Because I think even to get to like 8 or 9, for me personally, for them to get to 8 or 9, I still think that's playing a little bit above their talent level. And that means they have figured some stuff out, whether it's they're just completely locked down on defense and they're making it really, really tough. They figured out the transition game. They're hitting tons of threes, like whatever version of this gets them into that place. And I think there's a lot of different paths for it. I think I absolutely can take some of these games from teams. When if you can dial your defense up for for single game stuff and just hopefully hit some free throws, with Simmons or like just have things go right. For sure. So I think that there's lots of paths for us to get to that point, and where they're still like a really competitive, even in one-off environments. I would love to not have it be that case, because it was nice to not sweat it out last year.
And one of the reasons,
and
one of the reasons too why, maybe I think why I know I'm being a little overly optimistic with a 6 seed, or maybe 43 and 39 feels like too much. But one of the reasons why I really hope that they lock in, they do figure things out, like you said, is because securing that 6 seed, we don't know how it's going to shake out, but I tell you what is going to be way more difficult, going into the playoffs and saying, hey, your matchup is going to be as an 8th seed with the Milwaukee Bucks or with the Boston Celtics, right? Like, that's going to make it a far less exciting playoff appearance for the Nets. And regardless of that, even if it's a 3 seed and the 76ers figured things out, or the Cavs rose, whatever the case may be, Miami has a great year. I think also, if we just want to paint a positive picture, this may seem like low-hanging fruit, but getting a playoff win would matter for this team as well. Outside of the play-in tournament, saying, hey, we went into a series with whatever team, and this core won a game. Because they didn't do that last year. Last year, they got in there and it was kind of, hey, huzzah, if you don't mind, I'm a little exhausted. Mikal Bridges, I think I'm going to lie down on the floor here and take a nap, right? Like, it was hard to achieve that goal. And I know, does anyone care about winning one game? Maybe, maybe not. But like, you can't win 2 games in a series until you win 1 game, right? Like, you can't win 3 until you win 2. You can't win a series until you get the first game. So I think if you want to say that I look at this as like building block moments, get to a playoff series, have that lockdown defense, and be like, guess what? We really pissed you off for 1 game in that series, and played you tight in a couple other ones, right? Where you just kind of have that sentiment that this team is closer than further away from being top 6 seed competitive with consistency.
And by the way, they got swept with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, and they got swept without him. So, like, I don't know, maybe
I don't think that won't be a fan feather in the cap. If this version of the Nets team wins a playoff game, it'll go, see? And it's always fun to have those moments when you go, we did it without you, Kevin Durant and Kyrie. We can achieve whatever we want here.
Go 3 more seasons, and they were a toe away from maybe the championship. But alas, we live and learn, and we move into 2023-24. All right, in a second, we'll make some predictions around maybe some possible trades and players that could be on the move this season. We'll get into that in a second. First, going to tell you about our friends over at Game Time. When you are going to a sporting event, theater, concert, whatever it is, you want the thing's supposed to be fun. The last thing you want is the ticket buying experience to be frustrating. You're not sure if you're getting the best price. You're not sure what you're going to be able to see when you sit down in your seats. You're worried about if you're getting the best deal. It's all taken off the table with those worries when it comes to Game Time. You don't have to worry about buying the ticket to the next big event. Game Time is the fastest and easiest way to buy tickets for every sport, music, comedy, theater events near you. They got killer last minute deals. They got all in prices. You're going to get your exact views from the seat you're going to sit in. got a best price guarantee as well. If you go over to Game Time right now, a couple of different sweet stuff going on. You got Jets and Giants tickets still on sale for this coming Sunday, so get on that. That's the 10/29. Also, Brooklyn Nets hosting the Cleveland Cavaliers Wednesday. Still time. This just actually dropped a little bit. It was 41 early. It's down to 40. Started tickets at $40 over on Game Time. Game Time has got you covered for all of your ticket needs. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed.
All right, continuing our regular season preview, reminding you the part number 2 will be coming up tomorrow, where we drill down on individual player performances and key stats, some over-under action that we're going to have a little bit of fun with. So be sure to be part of that, and be sure to be a part of joinsubtext.com/lockedonnets. You would have gotten some text back and forth about the different discussion points we're going to have. What are we not missing? Who are you bullish on for Brooklyn? You get over there. It's being a part of the Locked On Nets Insiders group, one-on-one conversations with Doug Norrie and myself. 14-day free trial at joinsubtext.com/lockedonnets. All right. The other big factor inside of this is obviously going to be the trade deadline. Now, it's hard to sit here and talk optimistically about the team and then paint a picture where they start trading off pieces at the deadline. There are some possibilities here. You had one that was brought to us inside of the Nets DM group over on Twitter, which is a really fun place to be involved in. The trend's a little negative. But I think there are worlds, and I wonder if you agree, where the Nets can make a move, can maybe get an asset, can get away from a Royce O'Neal, but also functionally bring someone in. I have a couple of high-level optimistic opportunities where the Nets have kept their powder dry for the right reasons, and maybe even some modest moves that just help move this team forward. Where do you stand on how active you think the Nets will be at the deadline?
I think they'll be pretty active. I think they have to be active, at least with some of the veterans, for sure. And so I think we'll start. I mean, should we get into the name that should we not bury the lead here and just get into like who was thrown out?
I want to let you say it. I want to you use the words. I didn't want to bring it out.
Yeah. So I feel terrible. I can't find who originally said it. I know it was either Brooklyn Beats or Brooklyn 85. One of those two. And so really, really apologize. I searched my notifications to try to figure this out, but I couldn't find it. Either way, let's just say both guys said it, that Nick Claxton could be a potential trade candidate for the Brooklyn Nets during this season. I think there's a lot of different reasons you can talk yourself into why the Nets should probably seriously consider doing this at some point during the year. I know that's hard to hear. We are huge Claxton fans. We push for him to start and be the starting center. We were some of the first people on that. So, and the reason I know that is because I did an absolute utter victory lap when he actually did start and dominated. and that's
to remind everyone.
The reason I can remember that very clearly is because I wanted to blast all the haters, as they say, when it actually came true. And he was awesome. Yes. Anyway, moving forward, you can start telling yourself a very specific story here about why he could be a potential trade candidate, why he might not line up with the Nets timeline. I think at some point we will do a much longer podcast about this topic, but I can see a scenario where Nick Claxton, in almost any scenario where the Nets are, Nick Claxton is a potential trade candidate because as he enters a contract year.
Of course, and we know in the offseason, these guys and Ben Simmons specifically, they're fit together, right? I'll go on if we need to push back on it, right, and say it doesn't need to happen. We saw sample sizes of Claxton playing with a ton of shooters with Spencer Dinwiddie and Cam Thomas and Royce O'Neal and Lonnie Walker and saying, hey, surround him with them. Maybe it ends up being a bit unique in season in terms of how Jacque Vaughn finds ways for these guys to function without each other at times. And the other big factor to me is, one, if I think this team is going to be a 43-win team, and the defense is going to be a big part of it, Nick Claxton's a big part of the defense being good. So hard pressed for the Nets to push that button. Historically, the Nets are not on the front foot sometimes of making these difficult decisions. We know Patty Mills and Seth Curry and Joe Harris trades or letting them walk. Maybe they missed the boat on that. Royce O'Neal, did they miss the boat on getting the most value here? But I'll say that even if this was on the table, remember, the Brooklyn Nets can make a choice about this in the offseason. They can sign and trade Nicholas Claxton. They don't have to do it right now. And I think it'd be pretty volatile to take him out unless you're going to commit assets to go do something else. And I have some high level, explosive opportunities for them, but I'm of the opinion that I think it's not unreasonable they brought this up. And I don't think the Nets do it because they have not been the type of team that makes these type of decisions, especially in season.
And that's the case against it. I think that there's a real case where with Claxton specifically, the position, the potential money he might fetch, and just the Nets maybe trying to reset the deck here enough to have as many assets as possible for like a true superstar to come into the mix, and not knowing exactly who that superstar might be. And that's important for a guy like Claxton because, he's can't pair with everybody, right?
Yeah.
It's like, there's certain players in the NBA that you can pair with anybody or are so good that you'll just figure out the pairing around them. Claxton is not that guy. He's awesome, but we're already talking about potential fit issues going into this season with Ben Simmons. Like, you can't pair him with everybody. And so committing a lot of long-term money to that type of player, not knowing who might shake loose somewhere else when you could have assets to go get that player, I think is a strong case going into a contract season to think about giving him to a team where they know he does fit with everybody. And I think there's going to be teams out there that are like that. I'm with you that the timeline doesn't have to be the trade deadline. It can be the offseason. I think the price would be lower in a signing trade than it would be in the here and now because the team can get him. But there's risk because you don't know if he's going to re-sign. So I think there's a lot of different things. I guess the point about the Claxton piece was more about that. I just had never really considered that they would do that. And then when I heard it, I thought it might be closer to probable than possible. And it was more about that. But again, maybe a longer discussion for a different day about whether we think that would be most prudent. I think we're just putting it on the table as something like to not totally be shocked if it happened.
Yeah, and the other guys, obviously, that we talk about this, and if you want to be optimistic, you assume that it does work out with Ben Simmons and him and Claxton play really well together, and you go, wow, imagine that it could have been a possibility they would have traded him. It's been taken off the table because these guys have found a way to work together. But the other ones are the Royce O'Neals, the Dorian Finney-Smiths, the Spencer Dinwiddie's of the world. Now, it's going to be hard to take, I think, a lot of these guys out of the mix if I think they're going to be playing good basketball and winning games. But the one way that I thought about this being from an optimistic standpoint would be, first, Royce O'Neal. I think there's enough guys on this roster that he becomes, I'm going to say, quote, expendable. We said this chapter and verse. We love Royce O'Neal. It's just he doesn't need to be a part of this team right now. And that's sometimes hard to say with the way he looked in camp and the three-point shooting. But I think teams will use him, and I think he has value. Now, Sean Marks is going to set a price tag, and if somebody doesn't meet it, he will be on this roster. But even extended to a Dorian Finney-Smith, I'll submit to you that one of the reasons the Nets may be open to moving one or two of the veterans is because some of the young guys are ready to play, specifically Dariq Whitehead. We've heard at least positive inferences from the Nets, famous last words. They are cagey with their injuries and stuff, but they said he's going to play this year. So if you get yourself approaching that deadline and Dariq Whitehead has been on the court for a couple of weeks and looks pretty comfortable and is showing you he can be a rotation player, you can start to take away one of those veterans that you don't want to risk, having some loss of depth on your roster. And that can actually create an even different dynamic in the second half of the season. So I'm going to double down on the positivity. Not only do the Nets make a good move around moving a veteran, but it's actually because there's someone ready to step into that role for them in the second half of the season.
For sure. Or you're like, hey, Simmons is playing so well, and we're seeing that these Simmons non-Claxton lineups are amazing. Like, I think there's other really positive versions of this too. Like, I think there's young players that they're starting to develop. Maybe we see Clowney start to step up a little bit. Maybe we see that, like, hey, the Simmons minutes, no Claxton are good, and the Claxton, no Simmons minutes are good, but together it's like not totally meshing, right? I think there's these other versions, and we have more money committed to Simmons. Maybe he could fetch a higher price tag because his ceiling's a little higher, right? Like, there's other, they might feel compelled to make a choice sort of between the two if the on-off numbers are maybe really blatant or staggering or whatever, which I think they really have a chance to be. Like, it might look, we might get 300 minutes into this thing and be like, it's not really working. I don't want it to be like that, but I'm saying there's a positive version of this where it's like, this one thing is working really well, and we just can't do it together, right? Like, I think that's
no, and I think it's a reminder of the sample sizes with even the Lonnie Walkers, the Dennis Smith Juniors, as he gets his injuries sorted out here. You brought in some other guys into this roster where the early sample size will define, oh, this is working well for us, right? Our new functional offense. We talked about this last episode when Jacque Vaughn starts running plays for Mikal Bridges, and we see what that looks like. You're going to get a sample size that tells you, because we've said this, right? Trendon Watford. If Trendon Watford finds a role for himself, it's going to change and inform how you look from the highest possible level all the way down through this roster. And while, again, the Nets don't have the upper echelon talent that other teams do, we do believe that they are deep in a lot of spots, right? That the floor is higher for this roster from a depth standpoint. So optimistically, everybody's kind of hitting their stride. And Dorian Finney-Smith, and Royce O'Neal are playing good enough roles that you can look at them and say, oh, they have value now on the market, and they won't have this a year from now. They won't have this if they walk in free agency for Royce O'Neal. Even a guy like Cam Thomas, is he playing really well? And what does that mean from your decision? So I know, to round this thing out from the top, I have this team at 43 and 39. I have them getting the 6th seed. This is the upper tier of optimism for this roster. But at some point, things do break right in a couple of categories for Brooklyn. And I think very early in the season, you could be looking at them in a much more positive light from where your expectations lie. Why not? Why not think this team can hit some of these marks rather than assume it's going to be a disaster? And I really think there's too much talent and a lot of veteran experience here. And I believe in Jacque Vaughn, frankly, in what he's instituted this offseason with this team. I think this team is ready to surprise a few people this year. And it starts by getting off to a good run over those first 10 and 20 games and cementing roles.
There you have it. Nets in 7 over the Nuggets in the championship. That's all I heard. Sweet. Jokic is a bum, overrated. No, okay. I think in general, we feel good, man. We're going into a really different kind of season. You and I started the podcast. We came onto the Locked On Nets podcast during the Superstar run. We started the podcast basically the year that they signed Kevin Durant, right prior to signing Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. This is a different version of the team that we've covered for a full season in the past. It feels really cool to cover this kind of team. I think having a lot of question marks and being at a different stage of something is a much different version of this than we've done in the past. And I'm just really, really excited to cover it all season. If you are on board with it, and it sounds like you are because you're listening or watching, remember that this year, a couple things. One, Adam told you about join Subtext before, so join subtext.com/LockedOnNets. 2, if you have been on the YouTube feed or on the podcast feed over the course of your listening, if you're on both, great. Skip to the end of the show. If you are on one or the other, you want to make sure you're on both because, as with all things, we're going to be doing different stuff on different platforms. We're going to be coming at you live after every game, just about. And that's going to be over on YouTube. And those shows run longer than even go onto the feed. So we're there right after the game ends. And we go bonus stuff where we answer questions and we take a field, a bunch of stuff, but we really just kind of muck it up on YouTube. So make sure you subscribe to YouTube. Conversely, during this season, we're going to be doing minimum 1 episode a week bonus content on just the pod feed. Mostly probably going to come out on the weekends, but sometimes there'll be pregame stuff. And there's going to be a bunch of different stuff on the podcast feed that is just not going to be on YouTube. That's just how it's going to roll this year. It's all free for you, so no big deal. And that is the number one way you can help us come at you free for the rest of the season and beyond, is make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe over on wherever you listen to podcasts.
Last opportunity here on a Tuesday morning. Join subtext.com/LockedOnNets. 1 sentence. Why do you want to be in the Locked On Nets Fantasy Basketball League? This thing is going to pop off ahead of the official start of the season. If I like what I see, the league kicks off. If I don't, I shun you all. So get over to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnNets. I love everybody. Don't worry about it. And a reminder, my fine friends, that be well, do good work, and keep in touch. Garrison Keillor.
Oh, Lake Wobegon, baby.
That's right, baby.
Oh, shoot. I wish I had told you this because, I had
Lake Wobegon days.
What'd you say?
Lake Wobegon days, where all the women are strong, all the men are good looking, and all the kids.
No, but I don't think it's all those. It's not that. I think above average. There you go. I screwed it up. You crushed it. I screwed up. Garrison Keillor, one of the all-time great poets. We're back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball.